Like many families, mine enjoys foods with a wide variety of flavor profiles. That's pretty exciting for me as a cook, although we do have a great global culinary scene close to home. For today's show, I'm going to present 3 dishes that are inspired by the foods of Thailand, Greece, and Eastern Europe. I love all kinds of Asian cuisine, and these Thai meatball bowls I'm about to make for you are so delicious. So we'll start with, of course, the meatballs. I have some ground pork here in my bowl with a little bit of cornstarch and pepper. You could definitely use ground chicken or turkey if you prefer. Even beef would be fine. To that, I'm going to add some ginger. Whoop, this would be the garlic. And now the ginger, just to give them a little bit more flavor. And a quick tip for you, if you don't have fresh ginger root on hand, I always like to keep pickled ginger in my fridge, and you can chop that up and add it in place of fresh ginger in almost any recipe. So now we're going to mix up the meatballs, and truly the easiest way to do this is by hand. So I'm just going to put a glove on because I'm going to have to handle lots of other things later. And I'm just going to mush it all up just like this, nothing fancy. And then you want to shape the meatballs about 1 inch in size, so smaller than a golf ball. That way they'll cook more quickly and it makes them bite-sized in the final dish. So you can definitely do this by hand. And you don't want to pack them too tightly or they actually get a little bit tough when they cook. So that works out well. But an even easier way is to use a cookie scoop. And that way you can crank out a whole lot of meatballs in a jiffy. They won't be perfectly round, but it doesn't matter. And I just like to have a plate ready to put them on, especially if I'm making them ahead of time. Looks like these ones are going to need a little hand shaping before I cook them, and that's okay. At least you get the portioning done this way, and you know that the size will be consistent. If you are making them ahead of time, of course you can refrigerate. You should refrigerate them, but you can also freeze them unbaked. So I usually have a lot of different meatballs in my freezer with different flavor profiles. Moroccan ones, Italian ones, these Thai ones. So it's really fun to have them ready to add to the dish that I am choosing to make that day. So you get the idea. This is how we put the meatballs together. And then, like I said, pack them a little bit so they're about this size and shape. We're going to set this aside because they get to get cooked in the oven, and I've already done that here. So these meatballs were baked for about 15 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. If you check them with a thermometer, they should register 155 Fahrenheit. But before we continue with them, we're going to get our rice noodles ready. I love these as a base for the bowl instead of rice. It's just kind of a nice change of pace, and they're so easy. It's a no fuss, no muss thing. I've put them in this heat-proof dish, and I'm going to add some hot water to soften them. You don't actually have to boil these. They just need to get softened. And we'll put the lid on, and they can sit there until the dish is finished, whether it's 5 minutes or half an hour, it doesn't matter for those noodles, which is great. So we're going to take the meatballs out of the pan. You can see the bits of pink pickled ginger in these ones. Made it super easy just to throw them together in a hurry one night without an extra trip to the grocery store. And they don't shrink up too much when you're cooking them, which is nice. So now to this pan, I'm going to add some vegetables, and we don't need to add any extra oil because there's a little bit of fat that was released from the meatballs. So we'll start by chopping our shallot. Because the veggies are just having a quick trip, I wanted a mild onion. That's why I chose this one. And of course, like most of my recipes, you can always switch up the vegetables. Zucchini, green pepper. You could even do fresh vegetables if you want to do bean sprouts and cucumbers. So there's lots of options. And I'm just going to turn the heat on here. Might get a little bit of noise from the fan. And carrot, because it's so skinny, I'm slicing it diagonally so the pieces will be a little bit more evident in the bowl. So many foods, especially Asian foods, rely on the visual array of colors. So you want to make sure that you can actually see the carrot. And finally, some red pepper for color. And as I have mentioned in previous episodes, think about pieces being visible but also bite-sized, just like our meatballs are bite-sized. All right. So while these are just softening a little bit in the pan, we're going to get our sauce ready. And most bowl meals rely on some kind of a sauce to kind of hang everything together, because you've got often a starch component, whether it's quinoa or couscous or rice, or in this case, rice noodles. And so our sauce starts with water. Because we're using soy sauce, I always like to dilute it a little bit because it is so salty. To that, we're going to add some cornstarch. And this will ensure that our sauce thickens as it cooks, which is what you want to coat the meatballs. So we just have to shake this up. And then we're going to add our tasty other things. This is rice vinegar, makes sense for Asian cooking. If you don't have it, cider vinegar is always an okay substitute. Soy sauce, as I mentioned before. Now this makes quite a quantity of sauce. I really like my bowls saucy, so that's why I kind of went for this amount of sauce, and you don't always have to serve it all up. I've got some freshly squeezed lime juice and lime zest. And if you think about dishes maybe that you've had at Thai restaurants before, this is a classic Thai flavor combination here, with the exception of maple syrup. They tend to use white sugar, but I'm just a big fan of maple syrup, and it kind of gives things a bit of a Canadian twist. Just give our little veggies a stir here, and they only need almost what I would call a flash fry, just enough to soften them. And looking great. So now we're going to shake up our sauce. It's well blended, that's all we need. So we can set that aside for a minute. Once the vegetables have softened, then what we're going to do is return the meatballs to the pan, because they have cooled since they came out of the oven, and of course you want everything piping hot for this dish. That's looking pretty good for the veggies, so we'll put the meatballs back in. There we go. And you just kind of want to work them around the pan to warm them a little bit for a moment. While that's doing its thing, we're going to check on our noodles. Oh, they're coming along. They probably need about another minute. So that's great. Okay, now that the meatballs have warmed, we're going to add the sauce to the pan. Frisky lid, there we go. And I'm going to increase the heat just a little bit for a moment because we want it to start to bubble. And of course, because of the cornstarch, then it'll also start to thicken. All right, now we're ready to add the meatballs and the vegetables. I think I'm going to use a bigger spoon for this job. And you just really want to load the bowl up. I'm going to set it down so I can pick up the pan. That way it's easier to get all the beautiful sauce out. I'm really smelling the lime in the sauce right now. It's just absolutely making my mouth water. One last spoonful of sauce. And now we're going to add our herbs. In this case, we're going to scatter them evenly over top. And if you want to do a little bit of a fancy presentation, you can also take a few sprigs of cilantro, because it drapes really nicely, and lay them along the side of the bowl for an extra hit of color. And we'll finish it with some lime wedges, because you really want to squeeze a little extra lime if you're a lime fan like I am. And in case you're wondering, Thai food is generally eaten with fork, spoon, knife, so no chopsticks required. Doesn't this look like a fantastic Thai meatball noodle bowl?
I adore Greek salads because they just taste so fresh and flavorful, plus they're super simple to prepare. In this version, I've swapped out the lettuce for potatoes, which might seem a little unconventional, but it becomes a very hearty and satisfying dish.
When you're adding nuts to a recipe, it's always a good idea to toast them first for maximum flavor. You're probably used to doing that in a small frying pan or maybe even in a toaster oven, but guess what? Microwave them. It's the best way and they toast so evenly. As I mentioned, our second recipe today is evocative of the flavors of Greece. If you've been watching the show this season, you might recognize that I use this flavor profile quite often. And not just because they're delicious, all these ingredients, but because there's a really practical reason. If I shop once or twice a week and pick up a whole bunch of the same ingredients and use them in 3 or 4 or 5 different meals, that makes my life so much easier. So I urge you to give it a try, whether it's Chinese, Italian, Greek. See if you can pan out the same flavors over a period of time and just make your meal prep so much more streamlined. So we're going to start for this Greek-inspired potato salad with our potatoes, which I have parboiled in salted water and let cool. And I'm just going to leave them in this mixing bowl for now because there's a lot more that's going to happen in there. So we'll make our dressing first. Most Greek dressings have red wine vinegar, a little bit of lemon juice, olive oil, oregano. So we're going to go old school with this one and stick with all those tried and true ingredients. I've already got my red wine vinegar here, and I'm just going to open it up. I'm going to strain my lemon into this little custard cup just in case I have any rogue seeds that jump out of the strainer. Don't want too much because I have a fair bit of red wine in there, red wine vinegar, and that's the flavor that I would like to have predominate in my dressing. All right, I think that's probably enough. No seeds, excellent. Into the vinegar it goes. And next up, we're going to put in the oregano that I mentioned. As I'm sure you know, if you're buying spices like oregano or basil, small quantities are best because they do lose their flavor after just a few months, so you're better to buy them a bit more frequently than a giant bulk-sized bag. Little pepper and salt for this dressing because we don't have too many salty components, only the Kalamata olives are salty. And of course you could use a purchased Greek dressing if you like. I just really like making it fresh and again in small quantities for maximum flavor. I'm going to give the jar a little bit of a shake, as I always do, to get the dressing started and to dissolve the salt. That looks good. And now we're going to add in our oil. In this case, we don't have Dijon because that's not typical of most Greek vinaigrettes, but if you want a more emulsified dressing, absolutely, you could add in about a half a teaspoon of Dijon. Give it a good shake. That looks good to me. All right, we can set our dressing aside. So now, because it's a Greek-inspired potato salad, we have to add in a lot more vegetables, not just the typical North American celery, radish, hard-boiled egg combo. So I'm going to start by chopping some cherry tomatoes, and I'm not going to do my famous between the two lids trick. I'm just going to do these ones quickly by hand because there's not very many of them. Cherry or grape tomatoes, it doesn't really matter. They have slightly different flavor, but I would just say buy whatever looks best. If there are hydroponic growers in your area like we have in Ottawa, you can get fresh local ones year-round, which is pretty great. There we go. And I'm going to add in a fair bit because I want to stretch the salad to feed a lot of people. So more veggies means more servings. I wouldn't cut these too small. You want them to be on par with the size of the halved cherry tomatoes. Extra cut in there that I missed. All right, I'm going to put those in a bowl. And last but not least, we're going to do some red pepper. I know that's two red things. You could probably use an orange or yellow pepper and make it even more attractive, but this is what I had on hand from my big shop earlier in the week, so this is what we're using. A lot of these vegetables are pretty sturdy, which helps support the shopping once for many meals idea. They'll keep for many days in the fridge, unlike some more tender vegetables that don't keep as long. And we'll put these in a bowl. And as you can probably guess, really easy to do. A lot of this prep ahead of time, and then it'll be so quick when you go to assemble your salad. If you cook the potatoes ahead, I would cool them and cover them and just leave them at room temperature if it's only going to be, say, 8 hours. Otherwise, you might want to refrigerate them if you're doing them a day ahead. So now let's assemble our salad. Over here, we've got some pickled onion, and that's just red onion that has been soaking in warm cider vinegar for about 20 minutes, and it just takes the harshness out of the onion. So I'm going to sprinkle that on first. If you don't mind the flavor of raw red onion, then absolutely there's no need to pickle it. I just really like that it's a bit more mellow this way. Next, I'm going to put on just a couple tablespoons of the dressing so the potatoes can soak it up. And then we'll add more after we put in the rest of the vegetables. Quick toss. You want to coat them evenly. There we go. Now we'll add the rest of our vegetables. So our tomatoes, our great quantity of green pepper, and our red pepper. Now I'll drizzle the dressing right over this before I toss it, but I think I'm going to give it another shake because you can see that it's already separating a little bit. And I may not need all of this. You don't want to drown your salad, but the good news with this recipe is that you're transferring it to a serving bowl, so if there is too much dressing in the bottom, you can just leave it behind. I get hungry just looking at this salad. It looks so good. Get our board out of the way here. Now we'll transfer it to our serving bowl. See how colorful that is? Just looks so great. A lot of Greek salads are just all vegetables with, of course, the addition of cheese, which we'll do for this one. So adding potatoes makes this a much heartier option, which is great. So if you wanted, you could serve this maybe with some grilled lamb or chicken. I often just have it as a meal in itself because I just find it so satisfying. Just trying to get out the last few vegetables and leave the excess dressing behind in the bowl. If you assemble this ahead of time, the vegetables will start to soften, the cucumbers in particular, which is fine. It won't affect the flavor any, and it may absorb all the extra dressing, so you may want to hang on to the little bit you have in reserve and put that in at the last minute. So now to finish our bowl, we're going to strategically place some Kalamata olives. That way they get nicely distributed for appearance's sake. And with all these great toppings, I often have a second bowl at serving time so that people can add more if they like them a lot. And those that want to avoid them in the salad, if they don't like them, don't have to work quite so hard. And a little sprinkle of feta. That's another thing that could be extra on the side if you like. Just breaking up a few of the big clumps so that it looks more uniform. There we go. If you serve up a Greek-inspired potato salad like this, I think you're going to be asked for the recipe.
Many global cuisines are reimagined when transported to new places. That's the case with my next dish, a cabbage roll stew based on a traditional Eastern European meal that has been adapted and updated over time in North American kitchens. I find there's nothing more comforting than a hearty bowl of soup or stew, especially on a cold day.
And this Instant Pot cabbage roll stew is amazing. So we're going to start by sauteing our beef. And you can absolutely do this on the stove top. I just love the ease of using an Instant Pot. So in goes our beef. Absolutely could be made with, oh, I'm glad it tells me it's on. Absolutely can be made with chicken or ground turkey as well. I just like this because it's kind of more of authentic for the Eastern European flavor profile that I'm going for here. So I'm going to get ready to add the next ingredients, which will be the onions and garlic. And we put those in before the rest of the vegetables because we want them to cook down just a little bit and add a lot of flavor to the beef. And we can even add those before the beef has completely finished browning. So we'll do that now. This is quite a bit of garlic. That's typical of some Eastern European cuisine, and I just find that it goes really well with the flavor I'm trying to achieve here. And about a cup of chopped onions, a medium dice I would say. All right, it's looking really good. We'll just give the onions a moment. Okay, so next up, our first seasoning is Worcestershire sauce, and I use this for a lot of dishes, including Italian. It adds a really nice umami, kind of a rich, savory flavor without adding too much salt, so I really tend to favor that. But speaking of salt, of course, we'll add a little pepper and salt as well. I don't like to undersalt my dishes, but I definitely don't oversalt them either because we can always adjust that at the end of cooking if need be. For our spice medley, we have oregano, celery seed, cumin, and turmeric, and that mimics the flavor that I remember from the tomato sauce of cabbage rolls. And we're adding these in before the other things so that they can heat up and just release some of their flavor. And this way the meat will get nicely coated with the spices. Okay, next up, our prepared carrots, followed by the cabbage. If you have a really big pot, you can absolutely make a double batch of this. It does freeze beautifully. It's great for lunches, very packable in a thermos or in a microwavable container. Next up, we're going to add a half a cup of rice, and this helps to make the stew just a bit more hearty. And the cabbage rolls I learned to make had rice as part of the filling. Passata is my secret weapon. It's crushed strained tomatoes, so no seeds and not a lot of additives, so it just gives so much flavor to a dish. I use a lot of it in Italian themed sauces as well. That's about 3 cups. And then a whole lot of beef broth. I always like the low sodium kind if you can find that, because again, you can control the salt better as we talked about. So we'll give this a big stir. Want to make sure the rice gets mixed in. Now we're going to put the lid on. Our steam valve is closed. And we're going to press the rice setting. So that sets for 12 minutes, and we'll just let that run, and then we'll check it, and it'll probably be ready to serve up. Oh my goodness, it looks so good and smells even better. Bubbling away still. So you want to scoop right down to the bottom to make sure you get rice and meat and of course the vegetables. And it will thicken over time because the rice will continue to absorb moisture. So you definitely want to keep that extra beef broth that you didn't add before in case you're serving it later and it's going to thicken up on you. I love to fill the bowl as full as I can. It stays nice and hot when I eat it that way. One more tiny little scoop from the bottom. Just trying to get a bit more rice. All right, now we're going to put our green onions on top. It's so hot, I may even have to wait a moment till I dive in. There you go. Delicious Eastern European inspired cabbage roll stew. If you like lots of different global cuisines as I do, this menu might be perfect for your next virtual trip around the world. Whether you choose the Greek-inspired potato salad, this scrumptious Thai meatball and rice noodle bowl, or this delicious comforting cabbage roll stew, your taste buds are going to be very happy.